we going with the regular time schedule? We're just going to follow the time schedule?
Closely. If you're a smidge over, I think we can kind of...
Don't give me permission, Kim. Don't.
Yes.
Yeah, my dad has some really funny sayings. I think it's where I got my love of language is from my dad. From the time I was a little kid, he's always feeding us all, he wouldn't say, "Are you causing trouble?" He would say, "Are you an instigator?" Yeah, he's just got some great expressions. So the first thing is, hi, I'm Lori. It's nice to see you all. If there's somebody in the room that you haven't met yet, try to do that before you walk out of the room, just to say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so." It's a kind of a smallish, largish venue, in that's large enough that there are people here you don't know, but small enough to feel like you do, but you don't actually. So make sure you check in every session with at least one person just to say hi, especially if you are staying in the area. If you're from outside the area and you're staying in the area overnight, it's nice to know a couple of faces in case you want to know where could I go to dinner or what could I do. And if you're from the area, please, we would love to know information and feel welcomed. How many of you live within 30 miles of this school? Oh, good. That's pretty good in an area like this. Thank you. My school district was the third largest in New York State by size, but not by population. It was a graduating classes of about 94. Okay, but area-wise, just a huge, gigantic space. And so I'm used to this 30, 40 miles, in between locations to get to somewhere. Since we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to try to get to the basics. I love the core message of this particular conference is back to the basics. And it's so easy to get running off on so many different little ideas in this whole approach to teaching that I love coming back. So because we only have a short period of time, I'm going to keep trying to do that. Come back to the center, come back to the basics, and spread out. If you've seen this before, I apologize, but it's always powerful. This is borrowed from a website, which I will give you on the information later. You may have seen it, and Lance P. or Magister P. adapted it. And this is about comprehensibility in reading. And there's a lot of research out there, tons of it, hours and hours of reading and study and devotion to the fact that reading grows language. But you can't just stick with that comment, reading grows language. You have to understand that reading comprehensible, compelling input grows language. So opening a book and pretending or trying to read something that's hard isn't going to grow language. You need to have things that are comprehensible. So we're going to take a look at that and what kids have to have in order for it to be comprehensible. So if you already know the answer to this, pat yourself quietly on the back and just keep quiet until the end. Otherwise, in your mind, take a guess. A text should be blank % comprehensible for a reader to read it independently. And by independently, I mean without the support of a teacher or a dictionary. Or a glossary. Yep. Without the support of a glossary. And the part that's missing up there is to read it and understand it. Okay? To read it and be able to follow it. Okay? So, now, if you've been to a CI conference before, you have a good idea what that number was. If you've done a lot of reading online or following online, you have a good idea what that number is. But I want you to think about the kind of things that you had when you were in high school or middle school as a language student. The things that you took tests on or that you did in class. What percentage comprehensibility were those, do you think? Any ideas? Right, keep that in your mind. All right? I'm going to compare those two. So we're going to start, if I can, let's try this. Okay. I'm going to read this one to you. You live and work in Tokyo. Tokyo's a big city. More than 13 million people live around you. Of Borgel you are never, but you are always lonely. Every morning you get up and take the train to work. Every night you take the train again to go home. The train is always crowded. When people ask you about your work, you tell them, I move papers around. It's a joke, but it's also true. You don't like your work. Tonight you are returning home. It's late at night. Is schnooling no one. Sometimes you don't to schnool all day. You are tired. You are so, so tired. Okay? Comprehensible? Yeah, more or less. Okay. Could just, for the most part, is there anything in there you can't put together in your head and make sense of or take a guess at? Schnool. Okay. So if you had to take a guess at schnool, what would you maybe guess? Fooling, sleeping. Which works in one, does it work in the second example too? Sometimes you don't to schnool, you don't to sleep all day. Yeah, that's kind of a tough one. But out of that whole paragraph, it's maybe one piece out of 20 pieces of information that you can't get. So that's...
Borgle.
Borgle. Yeah, so Borgle you are never, but you are always lonely. If you had to guess what Borgle was?
Bored and alone?
Yeah, bored, alone. Yeah, possibly. I don't know. I didn't write it. But right? That's 98% words or syntax that you're familiar with. So that's very familiar. How many of you went right for the stuff that you didn't know? Like your eyes were really drawn to Borgle and schnooling. And as a very language teacher, we go right to the things we don't know right away. 98%. Okay. The story continues. In the morning, you start again. You shower, get dressed, and for Parkland walk. You move slowly, half awake, and then suddenly you stop. Something is different. Our streets of Fawcett, really of Fawcett. There are no people, no cars, nothing. Where do Wargle? You ask yourself. Suddenly, there is by quappin' loud a police car. It speeds by and then almost hits you. It crashes into a store across the street. And then another for Farflusa, a police car. The police officer sees you. Off the street, he shouts, go home, lock your door. What? Why? You shout back, but it's too late. He's gone. Still getting the idea of the story? Still following the idea of the story? Okay. What's new? What doesn't make sense? Fawcett. Dwargle. Yeah. Quappin. Farflusa. Yeah, some things are put in a funny order. Yeah. But
like 3 times that 3 big paragraphs are hit, or 3 big parts of the story are hit this time.
Yeah. There's some. How many people feel like it's starting to fall apart? Okay. Yeah, I don't know.
3%. I mean, that's like.
Yeah. This piece is so powerful that there's no way to fake it. Like it really starts in your own language. This is your own language, and then just a little bit of other stuff. We feel like we should be able to put that piece together. I mean, but it really does start to break down. I'll let you read this one to yourself. All right, now I'm going to step in here and interrupt, even though you may not be finished. The first reaction to this started a couple of slides ago, and that was giggles. All right, the first reaction always to the language that is new is giggles. And yet, I don't know about you, but I get frustrated with my kids when I say something in Spanish and they giggle. But I realize it's just a natural expression when every time I do this exercise and people giggle at the word in English, because it just sounds funny. And I get so frustrated because I don't want Spanish to sound funny. But the truth is, the giggles come anyway. And it's partly because it sounds funny, and partly because I think we're covering up that we don't know what it is, and it feels uncomfortable, so we giggle. And so it's kind of interesting how that reaction is. The second one, and I heard a couple people, how many people would read a whole book if it were written like this?
Me.
Oh, 2.
A Clockwork Orange is written.
Yes. All right, so 2 out of this class, okay? That's it, all right? That's it. Wow. Yeah. So when we're asking kids to read, and we really want them to be willing to do it, and to be able to picture it, and understand it, and get it, and keep doing it, if it's not more than 90% known, we're asking them to do something that we ourselves would not do. Okay? That's a high number. It's a scary high number. The scary part about it is that, oh my gosh, what's written like that? What do we have that's written that my kids will understand 90% of plus? Right? Well, luckily we're a community, and we create materials together. And there's a lot of things out there that people will lend you, give you, and you can buy. But you have to get to know your kids and what their level is, bit by bit, to do reading. Reading is no longer one of those things that you can just buy the book, hand them the book, and say, we're going to do this because it's our level. Mm-hmm. If you really, if once you've experienced this and you believe you want kids to really grow, then you've got to say, all right, then I've got to get the kids to a certain level before they read this particular book. I have to bridge or scaffold to do that. And there are lots of ways you can bridge and scaffold. Or I have to make it so compelling and interesting that even at this level, they're willing to go through it with me. Because originally, the first thing that I asked you to think about was books that they could read independently. Yes. So when you have things out there for free voluntary reading or FVR or SSR or whatever you want to call it, if you really want them to read and grow, they've got to be super easy. Even if they're stories that you created yourself, that you typed up from class, that they can read because they know the story already and they really know the language. They're not ready to read novels that are written independently until later on in the year. Now, as a class, as a group, now that's a whole different story. And so there's always this question, which is better, individual novels, individual reading, independent reading, or class novels? Well, that depends on you and your kids and your situation and what you've done to prepare them. If your kids have enough language to read independently, then just giving them independent novels as a class individually is fine. Otherwise, you need to do it as a class. Even though there's a lot of stress to a class novel, maybe everybody doesn't like it, maybe they don't like to read in general. I mean, there's a lot of downsides to teaching a class novel that some teachers see. But there are a lot of upsides to that. And the upside is you can be the bridge. These are great pieces of writing. These are great pieces of culture, great pieces of language, and you don't want your kids to miss out. So what you want to do is make sure that you've made the bridge and done that. Thank you, Sharon, for being the model of doing what you need to do when you need to do it. Yes, please feel free to follow Sharon's example at any time you want to do that. So, yeah, and actually, I think there's another example here, in case you really wanted to know the rest of the story. Do you feel like you're reading Jabberwocky? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And here's the other thing. There is repetition, but unless you know what it means, all you're getting is repetition. Repetition without comprehension is just repetition. It isn't getting you anywhere. And I have a story that I tell about this. The comprehensive piece is so incredibly important. You cannot underestimate how important it is. You cannot check for comprehension, check for meaning too often, unless they're all rolling their eyes at you. That means you're not just checking too often, you're checking the same way too many times. There are many, many ways to check for comprehension when you're doing reading. If the only thing you ever do is, what did I just say? What did that mean? If that's the only one you ever ask, kids will get tired of it and roll their eyes and want to throw things at you. So we want to have different ways of doing it. I'm going to read a sentence, and I want you to do gestures for it. I'm going to say a sentence, and I want you to sketch it on a piece of paper. I'm going to read you somebody's answer to a question, and I want you to point to the person who said that when I asked questions, because we just had a conversation. So there's a lot of ways to check for comprehension, but if you don't check for comprehension, you end up in a situation like this. I have this great poster of Mafalda in my classroom, the little girl, and she's a comic strip character, and she's really, 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 really funny. And she's got this just little poster, and it's got this big bubble over the top of it, and it says, basta, which means enough, okay, enough. I use that word all the time in class, all the time. Okay, I even have it written in English, like for the first couple of months, like all around the board. Enough, 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 enough. I use it over and over and over and over again. Well, November, okay, almost 3 months into the school year, I get a call from the principal. I need to come down right immediately to his office. So I go down, and he's like this, and he goes, okay, what'd you do, Clark? I'm like, what do you mean, what did I do? He goes, I've got this parent who's livid and wants to come in and strangle you. And I'm like, really? What did I do? And she goes, well, she wants to know why you're calling your kids bastards every day. This child just heard bastard. I mean, and even though I pointed to the word enough and I said the word enough, the sound of that word sounded so much like a nasty word to him, he couldn't get past it, okay? And I clearly did not check for understanding. I just assumed that they all understood what I was talking about, and I clearly did not. Now, that's always going to happen. There's always going to be some things that some kids don't get. But to make a point, checking for understanding is important because we cannot assume that they do know what we're talking about. In this particular piece, repetition or not is 80%. Yeah, it's very mind-blowing, I think. Most things that you get from a standardized test. So in New York State, we had to give these state exams.
The Regents?
The Regents exam, yes. All hail the Regents exam, yes. Yeah. And in truth, they turned out to actually be a pretty good test of things, and we were able to use it quite well. But the truth is, most of those things were 40 to 50% comprehensible. And so we were doing reading comprehension and college placement tests. They plan on them being 40% comprehensible. Okay? So the assumption right up front is kids only know a little bit of language. What can they do with a little bit that they know? Okay? And that's fine. There are certain instances in life in which that is necessary. Okay? When you go to a foreign country, if you're not fluent, that is the reality. However, that doesn't grow language. It grows no language. It's a nice way to measure language, but it's not going to grow any language. And we only have them for a few hours a year. So we want to grow as much language as we can. So I'm not saying that using those kinds of things from time to time to get kids comfortable with discomfort and, facing a challenge and being in a real life situation, it has its place, but not for 90% of our instruction. Okay? We can be doing so much better by them if we went to comprehensible. Okay. So now this leads us to this situation. This is a huge conflict within our whole methodology, within our whole profession, is authentic versus non-authentic text. Okay. So the question is, why do we want kids to read? We don't ask ourselves this enough. Nobody asked us this question when we were getting trained as language teachers. Nobody said, why are you having kids read? Why are you testing reading comprehension? Nobody put us in a conversation about that. We just knew that this is what we were supposed to do. Okay, now who took a methods class in reading in the target language? Did anybody? No. But how many of us are required to read? Yeah, everybody. But yet nobody ever bothered to teach us how or why. So we're doing it ourselves. We're figuring it out all on our own. So the question is, are the kids reading for comprehension? Yes. Those are two different skills. And for centuries, this is what we have called reading and second language instruction. And it is not reading. It's hunting for recognizable tests and making intelligent guesses based on what you recognize. Okay? It's about your test-taking abilities based on what you recognize. So clearly, the more you recognize, all right, the better you'll do. The better you are at taking tests, the better you'll do. But it is not about reading comprehension. All right? It's a misnomer. All right? So when we look at authentic texts, they give us a lot of things. All right? They offer us a lot of things that we can do with authentic texts if we really want to go that direction. All right? And there are times in which authentic texts are this beautiful thing. How many of you use memes in the classroom? Okay, are they not the perfect thing? I mean, you can find them that are totally comprehensible. The kids are actually interested in them. It's really exciting. They will read meme after meme after meme. If you have a PowerPoint with 42 memes and do one a minute for a class, you'll have their attention for 42 whole minutes. I mean, it's great. It's great. They might not read 42 different sentences in a story, but if you've got memes going with it, they're great. And why is that? They're compelling. Why are they compelling? They're interesting. Why are they interesting? Pictures. Pictures. The purpose of communication is to put a picture in the heart or the mind of another person. The purpose of communication is to put a picture in the heart or the mind of another person. And memes already have a picture. Okay? Now, the message, okay, and the picture together, all right, sometimes are funny because it's a juxtaposition. So you're also dealing with humor, all right? You're dealing at a much deeper level with language than just a simple sentence on the board, okay? But they love it, and it's also very modern. It's very contemporary to them. It's kind of their language, right? So when you have kids reading authentic texts, right, they can build a lot of skills. Right? They can build word identification, using context clues, and skimming. You only have a few minutes. What can you get out of those? Those are legitimate reading skills. But there are other ones we'd like them to have. Okay? Now, authentic text does expose them to real language. And I don't know about you, but I'm not a native speaker, so I need all the exposure to native language that I can myself. And so do my kids, too. Okay? But this is the number one use for reading. In the Spanish classroom, the English classroom, the Latin classroom, the German classroom, the Russian classroom. The primary use of reading is to check, to identify what their proficiency level is. That's what reading is used for. Okay? Now, what we're asking you to do is to flip that and use reading to grow language. So the first thing we want to do is up the comprehensibility of it. So that's why we offer, all right, purpose-written texts. And they're developed purposely for kids at a certain language level so that their language can grow. So the idea is they're connected. They come around a story. Everything in the world is a story, and you've heard it before. The brain is wired for stories. The very first language that developed after emergencies, after survival, okay, was story. Okay? Why? Why? Why is story important? You're passing on your history. First of all, so the rest of your tribe will survive. Okay? If you survived a cougar attack this morning, you want to tell everybody else in the tribe how you did it. Okay? And just in case that cougar comes back. You got to make sure. All right? Men, over the course of time, our number one thing is to survive. We must survive. So stories are actually connected to survival. There is the emergency sort of language, okay, that people get and people develop and people produce from emergencies. What's a baby's first language?
Cry.
A cry. Okay? A baby's first language is a cry. There are no words to it. But even without words, even though the brain has no words, a normal, healthy baby uses his or her voice to communicate within seconds of birth. Okay? It's natural. It's wired. It's wired in us. And so they communicate things to us, babies do. And what kinds of things do babies communicate with their cry? Their needs. Yes. Am I comfortable? Am I hungry? Am I wet? Am I cold? Am I lonely? Am I scared? Okay? Their basic inner needs come first. And then, after that, okay, what do we talk to babies about? What do we talk to babies about? Besides their
Bodies.
their bodies, their family,
Food.
themselves, yes, food, everything around in their immediate. We connect it to them personally, right? We connect the language to them personally. We don't generally tell them stories about the neighbors down the street unless we like gossip, okay? Right? We talk about his belly button, not the one the girl down the street was showing when she shouldn't have been, okay? So we keep it connected. So that's what we want to do with our kids too, because their brain is wired for that. Keep it close, right? The brain is also wired for stories, and that is how we shared history. For thousands of years, before there was written word, we shared history through oral language. And it's part of who we are and why we remember things. Right? So that's why we use stories in the same way. All right. So, a fluency text, okay, which is what these are. Okay? In other words, designed for students to be able to read fluently and see the movie in their head. Visualization is a key skill in reading, to be able to go from print to a visual in the head. Put a picture there. And these are those upper level skills. People are saying, can we please make language class rigorous? Okay? This is rigor. This is rigor. These are higher order thinking skills, all right, that we are asking kids to do. Now, one of them that is new maybe to some of you if you haven't studied reading is stamina. And stamina is the number one problem you're going to face when you start using a second language on a regular basis in front of kids who've never heard one on a regular basis. Is their ability to tolerate a second language for a length of period of time. And that has to build. We have to build second language stamina. You know, if you went to another country for a while, when you first got there, how exhausted you were by the end of the day. Just being surrounded, but after a while, you just even gave up trying to understand. Why bother? Okay, because you were too tired. But yet you were exhausted by the end of the day. Okay, that's the stamina. When you're reading, you need reading stamina, and reading stamina is an actual thing. And where this is a physical skill to be able to track words from left to right, and it's not easy for a lot of kids to do. Okay? And it's also not easy for them to track, remember what they read, and then keep adding the details to it. Because what I tell my kids is, here's what reading is. It's reading a sentence and creating a little picture. And then it's reading more and adding more details to the picture. And more details to the picture, and more details to the picture. But if you let go of the original picture, you got nothing. Okay? You've got to keep the original picture. And then you keep adding details to it. And for some kids, using that much working memory at one time is extremely difficult. Okay? And it exhausts them. So don't be afraid to just read in little tiny pieces, little paragraphs, and then build from one paragraph to two paragraphs to three, one page to two, and just be cognizant of the fact that for a lot of kids, that takes stamina. All right. Oop, that disappeared fast. Change the task or change the text. Have you heard it? Depending on what your goal is. See what comes next? Aha! So think about what you read during class. Okay. So we have texts that are created from classroom stories or conversations or parallel stories. These are things that we can create for our kids that are fluency texts. And there's a lot of ways you can do it. You can have somebody in class, all right, writing down the story in the target language or in their first language, it doesn't matter, as you're co-creating a story in class. So I've got actors, we're making a little story up as we go along, we're having a good time, getting ideas from the kids, it's all grand, all right, and I've got two kids here writing down the story for me in either English or Spanish, because I will never remember at the end of the period what was in that story. My brain is too old. So I just won't remember it, but now I have it in writing, and I can do that. I can have the class artist drawing it, so I also have an additional memory of it, which I can take a picture of, thank God for technology, and take home with me if I want to do it. If I have a native speaker in my class, because we don't have a native speakers class, or my school doesn't feel like a native speakers class, and that native speaker actually can read and write in the target language, but they're stuck in my level 1 class or my level 2 class because we don't address that child's needs, that person can be on the computer typing as we go along and doing the story. Or we can act out the story, and then together we can talk about what it is, and I can type it as we review it. Tell me back the story. And as you give me a sentence, I type the sentence, and then I stop and I ask questions about the sentence. Review. What else happens in the story? I put it up there, they watch me type it up as it goes, and then I ask more questions, and we go back and forth. So it's not as difficult as it sounds to create your own stories and have it do it actually in class and have it be an acquisition experience for the kids. Okay? Let's put a story up that we read yesterday and change it together. Let's change 3 things in the story. We're going to change the character, we're going to change the problem, all right? And then one other thing that you guys feel like changing. So who wants to change something first? And then you ask the kids, what do you want to change? You want to change the character? You want to change the problem or something else? What do you think you want to change? and I get something from them, from something I already wrote, and we address it, and we do it up here. Okay. Now, adapted text, embedded reading is basically an adapted text. And how many of you in here have seen an embedded reading or heard of embedded readings? Okay, so I'm not going to go into a huge explanation right now. But in adapted text, the goal then may be to eventually get them to an authentic resource. It's a great way to scaffold and get there because authentic resources are cool. It's cool to be able to say to kids, people who really read Spanish actually read this. Okay? And then there are the CI novels that are out there. In truth, the CI novels can actually be the bridge between teaching with CI and not teaching with CI. If you're getting your toes wet a little bit, and that's kind of how I got started, was I was really reluctant to jump in for about 4 years. And finally, I was reading with my kids, Pobreana, and I realized that by the time we got done with Pobreana, they had all these things that I normally would have taught, and they already had it. And I thought, oh. And then when I went to the workshop, I looked at the book and go, oh, look at that, there's repetition. Oh, look at that, there's questioning. Oh, look at that. And then I did it as a segue, and it helped me to bridge in my department, the people who wanted to do CI and the people who didn't. The people who didn't want to do CI were still willing to have their kids read. All right? And so we had a common base to go with. How are we doing with time? Oh, we still have some time. All right. All right. So now, before we get any farther with that planning and stuff, this is the stuff I do for school districts when the administrators want something. Okay? So we'll just pause right there because no one in here is an administrator, right? Good. Thank you for not admitting it. Okay. There we go. So now, the truth is, if we get back to basics with reading, the basic, most important thing is that it's comprehensible. The second basic important thing is that you need to know what your purpose is. And you need to be honest with yourself, if not with your kids, about why you're reading this. We're reading this because my department says we have to read this. And you know what? I'm okay with that if it's not everything I do. I'm okay with the things that my department wants me to read, and I'm okay with telling my kids, listen, I didn't choose this, guys. Okay? But there's a purpose for this, and the department wants us to do it, and here's why. And so let's go at it. Okay? And I can lead the enthusiastic charge, even if the enthusiasm is fake. Okay? And I can tell them that. It's not my love of my life. This is not what I would love to do, but I think we can kick this. Let's do it. And I can teach them that life skill. All right? Here's something somebody else thinks is important. What can we get out of it? Let's do it. Let's do it our way. Okay? And you can teach them that. Be honest with them. That's fine. You can do that. But know why you're reading what you're reading. In fact, always know why you're doing what you're doing. What I tell the kids at the beginning of the year is, if at any moment you are confused as to why we are doing something, ask me. Because I do not have the right to do something with you without you understanding why we're doing it. No one on earth has the right to do anything to you or with you when you do not understand why you are doing it. No one ever has the right to do anything to you or with you without you understanding why it's being done. Okay? And they need to know that. They need to know that about life. They may not have to agree to it. I mean, there were things that were done to me when I had my breast cancer treatment that I wasn't particularly happy with, and I probably wouldn't have agreed to if I'd really understood it. But the truth was, I knew why it was worth doing. Okay? I knew why, and that's why it made a difference. But that's a life skill that most adolescents have not yet achieved. Okay? And so it doesn't mean I expect any 11-year-old to get there, but it's good for them to know what the goal is. So know why, and then, whenever possible, make it comprehensible so that they can grow. Other than that, okay, in your mind, as people who have either tiptoed in to CI or have jumped in to CI and have been swimming in the ocean for a while, all right, what are some super important CI reading things that you think people need to know? Try to keep it fun. Okay, Pat. This is the $10 question. Woohoo! You have the choice of answering this question yourself or asking the group around you. Okay? Now, those of you who want to know how to vary the kinds of questions you ask, give an option for an answer or send the answer to the public. Okay, so you have a choice. You answer or they answer, Pat. What's one thing you can do to make it fun? Do you want to answer, or are they going to answer? She's going to take it. Yes. Pat, what is your answer?
Funny voices.
Funny voices. Oh, yeah. Do you have to do the funny voices?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Can you identify who in your class is good at funny voices?
Yes.
And sometimes it's a surprise, though. Sometimes kids will really surprise you. But yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Beautiful. Do you have a skilled funny voice you'd like to use for us?
I'm the drama queen.
I love it. I would not have pegged you as the drama queen.
When we're doing a story or reading or whatever and it needs a little drama, I'm the go-to person. I can give the best ever.
Okay, now just as a fellow presenter, I want you to know that this is the drama queen, should she ever be in one of your workshops, okay? I wouldn't have pegged Pat as the drama queen because she's very kind and she's very thoughtful, and she listens really well and she's so encouraging. But she's the drama queen. I love that. That's fantastic. All right, to keep it, it's not even so much, sometimes a case of keeping it interesting, it's just keeping it alive. Like, hello, welcome back, this was after lunch, I know you're digesting, but let's come back, okay, let's refocus, this is hard to do. Are you familiar with the number that kids can pay attention for the same amount of minutes as their age? Yeah, I agree. Can you repeat that? That number?
Times of their age, it's the number of their age times 4 minus 5.
Yes, something like that. Yeah. So, if you can keep an entire class's attention for 5 minutes straight, and you have everybody's attention for 5 minutes, and not one person thinks of something else, you are a miracle. Okay, you are a walking, talking miracle. We just can't do it. Our brains aren't wired for that. So we need these automatic things to bring us back in and keep them focused. Does anybody have a skill that they use if you're reading together, like say we're all reading this piece of paper, and Pat is going to be dramatic, and she's very dramatic. Can you do the por favor for us just so we can hear it? Because I want to hear it now. Oh, the porque. Oh, that's beautiful. The porque. Now, Pat does porque, and all of a sudden, it's Twyla. Twyla goes, oh my gosh, that was funny, but where are we? Does anybody have something that they use to keep kids with them as they go and as they read?
I haven't done this in my regular Spanish classes, but in my Spanish for Spanish speakers class, we have this problem a lot when we're reading. So I sometimes will read it aloud, and I will pause, and they have to scream the word that's missing.
Yes.
Just to show that they're still with me, and they really like it. And then sometimes I'll even have them just highlight the word if it seems important. They shout it, they highlight it, they're more tactilely involved.
Yeah, it just keeps them alive and moving here in your room. Absolutely. If you've never heard of the drop and drag, this is a trick a special ed teacher taught me many years ago, and it has saved a lot of my students. Physically tracking is really tough. And if you are a struggling reader, and you're reading, and you're reading, and you're reading, and you're about halfway down the paragraph, and you think of something else, and then you come back, you can't remember where you were, what do?
Restart. Back up. Yeah.
And that is so frustrating. And sometimes kids end up doing that 5 and 6 times in a page, and they just say, why bother? I give up. So my kids, we have index cards, usually in a bright color, and then they just take the index card, they slap it down on the pages we read. Everybody has an index card. All the novels have index cards, except during flu season, then they each get their own. And they slap it down on the page, and then they drop and drag as we read. So if we do it together, they do it, and then they take that skill individually and do it when they read. So it allows them, if they get lost, they know they only have to pull the card down a little bit, and they'll catch up to where we were, because we haven't gone that far. It also helps them zero in on particular words. It's also handy if kids have questions and they're independently reading, and you can't answer 35 kids at once. Okay? They can just write their question down on the card, and you can walk around and help them by seeing what question is on their card. Or some kids like to do it and just write down vocabulary they want to remember. It's also a nice place if you want them to keep track of what's going on in the story. They have an index card. They drop and drag. Park your card. Tell me what just happened. Park your card. Draw a picture of just what just happened. Park your card. Do that. And you can bring in some fancy target language if you want to with that too, calling it different things. Stop the elevator, park the car, whatever. Put on the brakes, whatever, whatever fancy target language you want to put in. Did I cut you off? Did you have something you wanted to share?
Oh, I was just saying something that I've done when they're reading is like I gave them a recipe, and something I'll do is I'll say for the class, I will give you 5 words as a class that you don't know. I will write those on the board, and I'll answer 5 questions for the class. And then they're forced to go to among themselves first because they don't want to use those 5 limited words.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was something like, we had the word pon, and they had panes. Is that plural? Yeah, I think that's plural. But then they had something like cucharadita, and whatever. It was like, what's cucharadita? That is a teaspoon. Okay? They have to be more strategic about asking questions.
You just brought up a really good point, and this is something that it took me a long time to learn. It really, really, really took me a long time to learn. And that is, I needed to stop just giving kids answers. That doesn't mean I didn't tell them what words meant. And for years I did, yo no soy diccionario. No soy diccionario. No soy diccionario. I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm not your dictionary. And then when I started to think about comprehensible input, I thought, well, every time I said no soy diccionario, they wanted to throw something at me. And I realized, well, I'm not really getting where I want with that. Okay? So they just said, okay, she doesn't really care that much. Otherwise, she'd tell me. I really want to know. She doesn't care. Otherwise, she'd tell me. But then I realized kids usually do know. When they ask me a word, 9 times out of 10, I say what it is, and they go, I knew it. Yeah. So I usually say,
What do you think it is?
Yeah, what do you think it is? Yeah. And if you've never done that, try it. Because 9 times out of 10, they know it. And that gives you this opportunity to go, you got it. Yes. Okay? And that's all they want is verification. They just want verification. And I did not realize that. I really didn't realize that they asked that many times for verification, but it really is true. And it's helpful. And it's a great question for them to ask other kids. Does this mean this? Because it's easier to say, does panes mean more than one bread? Okay, and the kid goes, I don't know. As opposed to, what does this mean? And the kid says, I don't know. To the kids, it feels different. I don't know, when you say, what does it mean, feels just deep and ugly. Does this mean panes? I don't know, but that's a good guess. Look at it. It leads them to discovery. Okay? Oh, I think it is that. So those questions are great. Oh, there's only 4 minutes left before the next one starts. Okay, not before this one's over. This one was over 2 minutes ago. FYI. So we didn't get to a ton of hands-on things, but again, this is back to basics, giving you things to think about. So think about that level of comprehensibility. Think about what it is that you really want to accomplish in the time you have with reading. And then, if you don't know where to get the resources, ask, because we've got places for you.
The story that we read, is that available?
I'm going to put that up for you. Yes, I'm going to put that up. I'm going to make sure that Kim gets it and puts it on the website. And it's how comprehensible is comprehensible by it's Lance, but Lance adapted it from somebody else. Do you know who did that? I have it, but not on this. It's in another part of this PowerPoint, and you guys know how I am about these PowerPoints today. It's a really cool thing. I promise you will. And if you go to Hearts for Teaching, it'll be in that blog post from here. I'll make sure that it's in there also. Okay, thank you. There's another one to go, people.